What a glorious time the 18th century was. Signing has been in place for over a century, and education for the deaf has begun to expand.
And even as early as the late 17th century, mainstream education attempts for the deaf were tried and were a success. While over in Paris, Abbé Sagard used signs for instruction at a national institution, Francis Green, also over in London, founded a free school that used sign in the classroom.
One of the first successful deaf schools to be established and still stands today is the Connecticut Asylum for Education. This school was opened in 1817 by Reverend Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet and a deaf native French teacher, Laurent Clark. In 1855, it was renamed American School for the Deaf. Sophia Gallaudet has agreed to be interviewed today in regards to her husband's work and deaf history.
Let me start by telling you a little bit about Thomas. He was the oldest of 12 children and graduated from Yale by age 17. While in Connecticut, he met a young deaf girl by the name of Alice Cogswell. He first noticed Cogswell when she was playing with his younger siblings in the yard and tried, but unsuccessfully communicated with them. He was then able to teach her the relationship between letters and objects. He took a stick and in the ground wrote out the letters H-A-T to spell hat, and then would motion between them and his hat. She understood the connection, and from that, he was inspired to team up with her father to open a school for deaf children.
Wow, that is a huge accomplishment. What amazes me even more is all the difficulty that Thomas went through to bring sign language to America. Can you tell us more about that endeavor?
He first went to Liverpool, where no one was willing to share their knowledge of the language, so he was quickly forced to move on. Shortly after, he heard about a series of lectures and demonstrations that Sicard, Jean Massou, and Clerc were giving on the methods of educating deaf French children. He attended and was easily impressed and was shortly after invited at no charge to attend the National Institution's preparation program. He was unable to follow them back to France until March of 1816, where he studied with Massou and Clerc. Shortly after, in June, Thomas and Clerc departed for New York and arrived back in August. They immediately set out to gain support and funding for the school. 7 months later, in a rented space in City Hall on Main Street in Hartford, Connecticut, they opened the first school for the deaf, and 7 students enrolled opening day.
Wow, that sounds like you set out a lot of groundwork for the future of deaf education. Can you tell me a bit about yours and Thomas's life together?
We were married after my graduation in 1821. It was a complete surprise to me. We raised 4 sons and daughters together, 4 of each, and all of them were hearing. Edward was the youngest, and after Thomas died in 1851, he brought me to Washington, where I served as the matron at the Columbia Institution for the Deaf and Dumb and Blind Persons for 9 years. Fowler Hall on campus was named after me, and on campus I was known as Queen Sophia. The school would later be named Gallaudet University in honor of my husband after he had passed away.
That's quite a nickname there. That's all very fascinating. Do you know anything about the oral deaf education? I'm interested in knowing about a particular individual, Alexander Graham Bell, popularly known as an inventor of the telephone, and was born in Scotland to a deaf mother and a father named Alexander.
Bell's father and grandfather were both speech teachers, and Bell took on the trade as well. His father developed visual speech, which consisted of written symbols that presented individual speech sounds. He later opened a school in Boston in 1872, and then in 1876 he received a patent for the telephone.
Do we know what brought Bell to invent the telephone? Seeing as Bell never contacted any of his close family using his invention, is it true that the deaf community looked down on Bell and even sometimes compared him to Hitler?
Surprisingly, that's accurate, quite disturbingly as well. Bell was working on a device to help his mother hear better when he invented the telephone. Unintentionally, it would put deaf people at a disadvantage for many decades. Although he worked in deaf education his entire life and both his mother and wife were deaf, he seemed to think of deaf individuals as defective and was against people bearing deaf offspring.
Wow, that's all amazing information to take in. I can see why Bell declined the opportunity to publish his research. It's shocking to me to know that somebody can work in a field all their lives, come to find out that they are not accepting of who they're helping, but instead find them defective. Thank you so much for enlightening me on the topic of deaf education and the history of all of it.
No problem. It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks.